Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Meade.
And I'm Christy.
In this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out.
But actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose. All right.
Hey, babe. Oh, this is a good one. This is an exciting one.
This is exciting. It's so, it's kind of like, where do we begin when we start thinking about, exploring our relationship to alcohol? Understanding any relationship requires first understanding our relationship to our minds, because that's where it all starts, right?
Yeah. And don't you feel like this is like really the key kind of component that makes the way that we coach so much different than a lot of other recovery, or however you want to call them, methods of ditching alcohol? This is where like the real meat and potatoes is, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To change a behavior, and to feel freedom from something. So we're looking for the feeling of freedom from changing a behavior starts with having to change our thinking, because if we just change the behavior, we haven't really changed how we feel about it. Then we don't have that relief that we're looking for, that peace that we want to, feel, that freedom. And so, it really starts with understanding, our minds are our friends. And I think, learning how to find freedom with our mind, working with our mind is so key. But for so long, I didn't even know that my mind was like separate from me.
Yeah.
And what about you?
No, yeah, so true. Like it's so funny though. You say these things and it's like, oh, okay. But it's like monumentally life-changing when you can come to the realization that you're not what's going on up in your head.
Gosh, that's the start of freedom. Amen. Amen. I am not my mind. Wow. That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think when we get into the busy of life and the autopilot mode, and we're going and doing and small children and jobs and, all the things that we just, we easily get wrapped up as being the same as our mind, and don't realize that the things that we think are affecting how we feel and how we're showing up in the world. And so therefore it's just kind of like directing our lives without our awareness and without our, out of our control. And that is, for me, for sure, exactly how I ended up in the nightly, wine cycle that I was in. Because then it was, okay, like I need relief from all of this conflict that I feel, and the noise of my mind was so loud. So it's in that awareness that we have that opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah. What would you say to the listener? And I'm asking this questions because this was so me. When anybody started talking about like the mind or like cognitive dissonance or like this kind of, mind, even just mindfulness, my first reaction is like, no, that's too woo-woo for me. That's like, no, where did you, I guess, is that how you like felt in the beginning, and how'd you get to the other side?
Well, Christy, how long do you have? Oh my gosh. But no,
by the way, we should mention that this might be a 2 or 3-parter because we have so much to say about this. But anyways, yes. Yeah. How did you get there?
Well, yeah. So way back in 2017, I was in the checkout line at the grocery, and on the cover of the magazine, I don't know if it was like Time magazine or one of the, whatever. It was like mindfulness. I remember seeing this word, and it was this picture of this woman sitting there, doing her like, ooh. And I saw that, and I'm like, and it just gave me this kind of like, what does that even mean? And there was this resistance to it. It felt very new, very like, not anything I would be interested in. So so that was my first experience. So anyone that would say, like, if someone had come to me and said, hey, like, just get control of your mind, and like, what, I don't even know. That doesn't even sound practical.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think, 100%. I thought it sounded really woo-woo. And then I had a major resistance to it because to me it felt somehow anti the Bible and anti kind of Christian because of how I think it is talked about in the secular world of The Secret and manifestation and all this other stuff, which I'm sure we're going to dive into. But it just felt like, wait, no, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to somehow like all bring it back to the Bible, not realizing, of course, that as you have in our beautiful outline notes here, it talks about this stuff almost 100 times in the Bible. Right?
Yeah, I know. And I think that for sure is exactly my experience. It's like, am I even allowed to explore this work? Because for talking about, it does have this, I mean, to me, it has this, Buddhist kind of flair to it. When you think about mindfulness and meditation and all of that comes along with changing our mind and doing this work, for sure, there was that, like, is this even allowed? So I think through turning to curiosity is always the answer whether we're looking at our relationship to alcohol or anything, anytime we feel discomfort in anything, that is a great opportunity to turn to curiosity and figure out what is that about? And that's the power, like that's the beautiful thing about learning about our minds and how they're working for us or against us in a lot of cases, by being able to like pay attention to like what are our thoughts and how are they directing things. Our minds are like our gatekeepers to everything we experience. So whether there's something in our external world that's happening that we're kind of, that we're taking in through our senses, or we're sensing something internally, our mind is the thing that is assessing it, analyzing it, and making it mean something. That's how our mind keeps us safe, so to speak. It's always like scanning for danger and threats. And so it's that entry point to, okay, quickly, let me make this mean something. And then that from there creates, some way that we feel, and then, our actions and things from there. And so understanding that, like, I think that was the most mind-blowing thing when I picked up This Naked Mind and started this work. It was like, wow, okay, like I can see why willpower, trying to change my drinking through willpower, when I came at it from the behavior angle, I can see exactly why it didn't work. Because I'm not looking to get rid of alcohol from my life. I'm looking for a feeling that removing alcohol from my life will provide, which is peace that I don't feel from the drinking. Of course, the drinking causes, feelings we don't want to feel too, like physical things that are not good. But more so, what I was wanting to find was peace in my relationship to alcohol, or freedom from it. And that meant not just changing a behavior. It meant having to go, okay, what are these thoughts that I think that are influencing, me being able to say first thing in the morning, like, I'm not drinking tonight. And then by 5 o'clock, I'm saying that I'm drinking. That was kind of, the beginning for me.
Yeah. And just knowing, and I think we'll probably like maybe touch on this when we talk more about kind of like how to change thoughts and things like that, but not, knowing now that you can interrupt that step between the thought and actually giving it meaning, right? And that's so big. It's like, okay, this doesn't have to spiral into a total and complete meltdown. We can stop it there and make it mean something else, or not give it that meaning. Or, and this was like one of the things that, I don't know, maybe it was Annie, maybe it was somebody else, maybe it was you, I don't know. Someone said, let the thoughts float in, and like, you can also let them float on by, and you don't have to grab onto them. You can let them sail on by, let those thoughts go, and just kind of move on with something else, and choose how you're going to redirect them, and choose what you're going to make them mean, and all of that, which is so powerful.
Yeah, that's what one of my girlfriends had described it as, like seeing our thoughts like going down the conveyor belt, like at the grocery.
Yeah,
like, so
good one.
Once you start kind of becoming aware of your thinking, so like, we talk about, I guess we should back up a little bit. Like we talk about like conscious thinking and like the unconscious thinking. So the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, and there's only so much that we are conscious of that we're thinking, and there's so much that's being absorbed subconsciously, unconsciously that gets stored. I mean, I think it's, 11 million bits of data we're taking in every single second, which 11 million
bananas.
bits of data, but only 50 of those bits of data we're conscious of. And so that means there's a whole ton of data that we're just collecting, and the subconscious mind stores everything it's ever heard or seen or done or, experienced. It stores it all. And all of that influences the thoughts that we have. And so when we talk about how our thoughts kind of direct our lives, if unchecked or unexplored, it's because it's pulling from all of the past to make these meanings. So when I see my husband roll his eyes at something, an eye roll to somebody else might mean, they have my husband would be like, well, if I see someone roll their eyes, I'm thinking that they have a twitch in their eye or something. Whereas I see it as it meaning, oh my gosh, he's super annoyed. That meaning that I assign to an eye roll from somebody, and maybe that's not even a good example, because I think most people would, somebody rolls their eyes.
No, but I know what you're saying.
There's a negative connotation, but it truly comes back to our meanings, what we make them mean, and through understanding the thoughts that we have that are repetitive, and how those form together to create our beliefs, our stories, so to speak, and how that affects everything. I mean, it's foundational to everything. Knowing this is, there's not a day of my life that I don't use this work, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what are the things that influence, what influences the meanings we make of things? We already talked about past experience, but conditioning.
So the average listener that might not remember what subconscious versus conscious mind is, let's kind of dive into that, because I certainly needed a refresher when I was doing all this.
Yeah, totally. I mean, our conscious mind is very basically, it's, the thoughts that we're aware of, the thinking that we're doing that we're aware of. And so I'm very consciously right now, thinking and having a conversation. I'm very conscious of that. But what you can't see is all of the subconscious thoughts that influence what I'm saying right now, or how I'm sitting, or, how we're engaging together. So it's all of that is below our level of awareness. I think at times in my life where the majority of my thinking was on the unconscious, subconscious level, I wasn't conscious even, or aware of what I was thinking, or, because again, going back to how we started, it was, my mind was it was me, I wasn't separate from my mind. So when you can kind of think about that, does that kind of,
totally.
Clear as mud?
No, and I like to think of the conscious mind as the neon billboard thoughts that you can feel and see and hear in your actual mind. That's how I kind of think of it. And then exactly what you said, the subconscious is more just everything that influences why you're thinking those thoughts, and it has so many components to it. I actually had a client yesterday, and we were on session 8 or 9, and she just kept saying, but I know this. I know this, but I know this. And I was like, I know that you know it. I can see that you know it. You're really smart. And you're telling me back the things. But she's like, but then why am I still drinking? And I was like, because somewhere in your subconscious, you believe that there's still a benefit there. And so that's where we have to get to. Yeah. And she's like, but I know it. I'm like, but it's different.
Yes. No, you're exactly right. That's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. I mean, that's where that conflict in thinking comes in. We know it. We can know it with our smart mind, our conscious mind, our, conceptually and intellectually. Alcohol does not, provide any benefit in my life. I mean, I know this is one that I spun around for so long. It's like, I know that it provides no benefit in my life. I know that. Yet, why do I still, feel in those moments of whatever, like, why am I still pulled to it? Why do I feel like there's a benefit to it? And to your point, that is what is locked down in our subconscious. There's some perceived reward for doing the thing. And that's how it becomes, or gets locked into like a habit loop. Dr. Jud Brewer, I love his work on habit loops. He has this video called Everyday Addictions, and it's just this great little visual of how things become those things that we believe give us, a benefit, how it gets locked into these habit loops. And it's no different, for alcohol or, anything that we're trying to kind of explore our relationship to and maybe change. And I think it's being able to think about thinking, or as fancy folk say, metacognition, the term for thinking about thinking, being able to do that and being able to turn to that is like really what we do in this work. And it's amazing. How do you get to what those beliefs are, like those subconscious, if they're below I think this would be my question, right? It's, well, if they're below my level of awareness, how do I find them? Mm-hmm. How do I know like what my subconscious is feeding me as a benefit that's making me want to do the thing that I don't want to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that video, and we should link it in the show notes, guys. Yes. We should link that one, because that's a good one to watch. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is one of those too, where as we're talking about like changing our thinking, and I think about, in Matthew 4, like what, like we can talk about like what the Bible says about the mind and our thoughts, and, repent because the kingdom of, Jesus is saying, repent because the kingdom of heaven is near. Repent is change your mind about something, because your mind is that kind of, gatekeeper, that gateway to your heart, to, everything else. And, even looking at the Everyday Addictions video of Dr. Jud Brewer, like seeing that as a way to change our thinking when we come into exploring our relationship with alcohol. I mean, at least I did. It was a very like traditional programming. It had recovery, sobriety, alcoholism, AA, rehab. Like those were the words. That was the meaning that I had associated to, changing drinking or quitting drinking. But even just in being able to be curious and see what are other possible ways of looking at this thing, that's where we feel that expansion and that opportunity to create new meaning. So looking at the Everyday Addictions video of Dr. Judd's, it's like, oh, well, maybe it's not just this black and white thing, when you talk about, and it was the same with this naked mind, finding this naked mind. It's, oh, like there's so much more to this. And so how do we do that? How do we figure out what those mind stories are that are influencing everything we're doing? How do you coach people through, like when your client says like, I know this, but like, how do you go from there?
Yeah. I mean, so I step back and I really like to dive deep into the whole cognitive dissonance thing. Right. And so that there is this like internal battle that we're constantly going through, that we just, until you're aware of it, you're just not aware of it. Right. It's like the whole point of what we're talking about here is like, there's one desire that we wake up and we don't want to drink anymore because we know how it makes us feel. But then by the time 5 o'clock rolls around, we feel like it needs to be the reward to cap off the end of our hard day. And so it's that part that we just don't even realize that that's why we're drinking it. And I didn't either. Like, I didn't realize that there were reasons. I just thought it was almost, I was on autopilot, for so long with the drinking. And so I like to really dive deep into like what those reasons are for why, the person that I'm coaching is drinking. And it takes, it's so funny because I usually start off by tried to like suss out a few of them, and I'm sure this is true for you too, where like the more you talk to someone, the longer the list gets. But that's because we have to deal with so much of that subconscious conditioning of how that belief of that benefit came to be. Like, you know, a huge one obviously is the mommy wine culture thing, the fact that like we as moms believe that we should, or that we can, I guess, use wine to de-stress and cope with our kids, and that it's the ultimate way to relax, unwind, and reward ourselves. And that is not something that I even realized was being like thrown in my face from so many different angles, right? And so that subconscious belief that I needed like wine to be a mom was fed to me from everywhere. Friends, social media, TV, movies, like every which way possible, you know. And it was so incredibly obvious and rife during the pandemic with people needing, you know, putting on Instagram their wine because it was really tough to homeschool and all of that stuff, which I'm sure we're going to do a whole episode on because it's crazy. But you know, so diving deep into these subconscious beliefs and figuring out like where that came from, and just, I think, being aware of it, right? Being aware of like, oh, that's a reason that I'm drinking.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Because that it might not be the neon flashing lights in your conscious mind of I am drinking this as my reward, you know, but deep down it's the reason that you're opening the bottle. And so starting there, I think, is so good. What about you?
Yeah. And I what comes to mind for me is I keep going back to like, you know, the neuroscience that Dr. Judd points to with like, we don't do anything we do without there being a perceived reward in doing that. And so it's so easy to see how with the conditioning that we are being bombarded, you know, the messaging that we're being bombarded with, gosh, I can't say that word today. You know, constantly the conditioning that we experience, it's no wonder that, you know, those messages around like alcohol, alcohol helps me relax, or, you know, I need wine to be a better mom. I need wine to unwind. I need wine to be social, all of those things. And if you think about what's kind of underneath it all, it's like the promise of what that thing, it's how we're going to feel as a result of doing that thing. That's the messaging that we're, you know, absorbing. It's how we're going to feel as a result. But then we bump up against the reality of what we're seeing. And this is where that cognitive dissonance comes in, is that like, I feel like, you know, alcohol is helping me feel all of these things, relaxed, connected, you know, less stressed, less anxious, helping me sleep, helping me feel all of these things. But what I'm, you know, realizing consciously, cognitively, is that actually it's this thing that's actually getting in the way. And once I start looking at like what, you know, once you go into the science and how alcohol affects your body and your brain and your health and all of those things, you're like, oh no, I don't want that. I don't want that. So you can see consciously, I don't want that. But then there's that still, we're fighting against what we want to feel. And that's where it takes. So if I had a penny for every time a client said, I know this, you know, that, gosh, I would be a millionaire, because that's what I think is so frustrating in this work, but also knowing that means that you are doing the work. Like when you can see that you know this, but there's this discomfort, that means there's a conflict in your thinking. So let's talk about it. Let's figure out where that conflict is. Does it really help me relax? Well, let's find the truth, you know, and explore that, get some clarity on the truth, find the evidence for or against this, not from I'm trying to prove this a certain way, but from a place of pure curiosity. That's where that turned curiosity is actually what allows us to get out of the stressful feeling that we feel from the conflict.
Yeah. I love that statement. Like, we do literally everything that we do to feel a certain way, everything, including pay taxes and go to the dentist, right? No matter what it is, we're doing it to feel a certain way. And it's something that I just kind of, I think, missed when I was drinking, right? I didn't realize that I was I mean, I guess, like, of course, I knew that I wanted to do it to relax, but I didn't know, I think, the extent of what was in the subconscious lockbox. I don't know, whatever, however you want to call it. I didn't know how much was in there.
So much. Yeah, 11 million bits of data every second, and only 50 are conscious. Like, that's so much. That's what I find so fascinating about this. It's like, well, and that's what was super helpful for me on this journey, and realizing, like, okay, it's not my fault that I'm in a place where I want to drink and I don't want to drink, and I say I'm not going to drink, but then I find myself drinking my life, 3 years ago. Like, it's not my fault because of this conditioning that happens, or the programming of our minds through all this messaging that I would have told you I was immune to. Like, I would have said that, like, there is no way that these Super Bowl commercials that, they pay, millions of dollars for, and think about what they're, promoting mostly in those commercials. And what is the feeling behind what the message they're sending? Like,
Yeah.
Drink this, you'll be relaxed. Drink this, you'll feel, it's status and glamour and connection. It's all about those feeling states, and being able to kind of zoom out and get curious about what are those messages that have maybe influenced me. And also, like, it's that turn away from, there must be something wrong from me, something wrong with me, that I'm in this place where I'm not I have this relationship with my drinking that I don't like. Well, it's no wonder. You just got those competing thoughts there. And doing this work is what allows us to find the freedom. Like, changing the thinking literally is, addiction to our thinking is greater than addiction to our drinking. Change the thinking will change the drinking.
Yeah. So good. So good. And it's, I like to say, it's like, going forward from here, it's not our fault thing. Like, it's almost, it would be weird if we didn't.
Yes. That's a good way of saying it. Yes.
It would be so weird if we didn't, as moms in this society, even though we live in different countries, get hooked. I was at the movies, and it was an animated, I don't even know what it was. It was like Minions or something recently. And there was a commercial before the movie that was just a grandfather and a grandson, and they were, like, passing a flask back and forth and around the fire. And it was like, I don't know, a whiskey, or I don't even know what it was, but I leaned over to my husband and I said, and they're selling connection. They're just selling connection. And, my kids are 10 and 12, and maybe they're not consciously aware that there's an advert in front of them saying that in order to, like, be close to your family, you should buy this kind of whiskey. But it's now in the lockbox, or whatever we're going to call it. We need to come up with a good name for it. But, like, it's in there, and
it's stored.
It's stored, and it's going to compound with a bunch of other stuff they're going to see probably on YouTube.
Well, and it's going to create the lens from which they see everything. It influences that lens through which we look at things and make decisions about things and show up. You're exactly right. And my husband loves Yellowstone, and I watch it. Oh yeah, I do. We watch it together, but I've gotten to the point where it's really hard to kind of watch, some of these. It's really hard to watch TV because the alcohol is so, I can see right behind, I see behind, I'm like, why are they selling? I mean, John Dutton has, the whiskey, and Beth is, she's kind of a mess, right? But, like, they're also glamorizing her excessive drinking and all of those things. And of course, like, not that my kids would be around when we were watching Yellowstone, they would not. But if there is a commercial with alcohol, it's funny how my kids are like, oh, they look at me because I'm like, oh, like, why are you selling it this way? It's not, it's lies. It's not true. But just thinking about how influential that is without our awareness, and then being able to pay attention to it. And that's something that I'll have, I recommend to folks, like, try and like start paying attention to, like, ask yourself the next time you're watching TV, notice where you see an alcohol commercial or if there's alcohol in the show. What is the product behind the product? So like, what are they trying to, they're trying to sell alcohol. I mean, those products are placed very intentionally in TV shows and all of those things, movies. What are they trying to sell as a result of that? Like, what's behind that? Just get curious about that. We were watching Elf the other night, and there was a poster in the background of the doctor's office when he was in the doctor's office selling a pharmaceutical product. And I was like, the fact that that pharmaceutical product poster is right there on the screen, it's not because that just adds the legitimacy of this doctor's office, this set. No, like, it was very front and center, poised. It's an effort to sell something. And so thinking,
is it a pharmaceutical product that you used to rep?
Not that one. No. Yeah. But I mean, and that's how it works. Just my kids don't know maybe what that product is, but they're noticing the poster and they're seeing the word, and there's a word in it that anyway, it's like, I don't know if we're allowed to like say these names or not. I don't want anyone to come after me, so I'm not saying what the product is. But it's that kind of stuff that it's like, on one hand, I want to be like, when I first discovered that, like, I want to be fired up about that. But on the other hand, it's like, thank goodness I know what I know now. And we can be curious about these things. And once we start having that awareness for how we're absorbing messages, how we're making meanings, like, how does our mind make things mean things? And from the messaging that we're receiving, from from everything we're experiencing, and where do we have that opportunity to change it? It's through bringing awareness to our thinking, bringing awareness to our feeling, our body sensations. Our bodies hold so much wisdom, and they're always trying to signal to us things that we need, and they're always trying to communicate to us. But so many of us, I think, are disconnected from that and kind of live in our minds, and the mind kind of runs the show, but not from a always very logical place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important to like note really quickly, because I feel like we breezed right past it, is that like this definitely starts as children at home in the family and our family units. And I mean, it starts so young. The last belief that had to be killed and die for me was the alcohol to have fun belief. And that started really just, I think, for me with the fact that it was always at parties at home, like, not that like my parents were having ragers, but like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and my mom loved to host, and there, that it's just intertwined then with fun, and it's intertwined with holidays and Christmas and everything like that. So all of that is like in the lockbox, and we don't even realize it.
So true. Yeah. And as we're experiencing that conditioning and forming these meanings, and that's, and then we get to this point where like, okay, like, this isn't working for me. And so I know that alcohol is getting in the way of everything, that I want to experience in life. And yet I still feel this, that's where we experience, the cognitive dissonance that we touched on, that internal conflict where it's like, I know this, but I also feel this. It's in conflict. That place is painful. And that's the place where we then, to ease that pain, start looking for confirmation for what we're feeling. And which brings us to like, but Jesus drank wine, like, that was my story when I noticed the conflict of like, I don't want to drink anymore. It's getting in the way of my life, but yeah, I feel like I want to drink, searching for, not that I actively search for it, but finding that confirmation. Oh, but Jesus drank wine, so it's okay. That was kind of that way of trying to ease the pain of this conflicted thinking, or that conflict between how we think and what we desire. And so, once we understand what that looks like for us, that's where, that's where we have the ability to kind of change it through, again, like awareness and curiosity. I mean, I think those are words that I get sick of saying because
but
that's what we
so
need.
important. It's so important. It's so important. And I think, the curiosity and awareness of all this stuff takes different amounts of time. I think that's something that I'm asked a lot, right? It's like, well, how long does it take? Give it to me in days, and it's just not the way it because we're programmed differently, and because we have so many different like experiences and things coming into our lockbox, we have to experience like so much of I don't know what the word is, like untwining. Is that a word?
Untangling.
Thank you. Untangling these beliefs and the things in our subconscious and running them through the lens of, is it true or not? And I think it's, I think we're going to talk about this in the next episode, but I think it's so cool as Christian coaches is that when we are diving into this, what's going on in your subconscious and what's going on in your thought life and like, how can we change that, in all of this, like we have a book that we get to run it all through, right? And we have truth that we get to run it all through, which is so good because it's just a lot easier to dispel a lot of what's going on up here.
Oh my gosh.
Does that make any sense?
It did. No, it's like, no, I know. I think about it all the time. I'm like, we as Christians have this, like, when we're looking at our beliefs and what, where they're limiting us.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for clarity and we're looking for like that evidence and we're exploring that and we're getting curious. It's like, I know, I'm like, gosh, as Christians, like we're really lucky because we have this cheat sheet of the truth. Like I have this place to go to find the truth, and that evidence, is, it fast tracks us to being able to go, okay, like now I know this, like how did the belief that alcohol is fun, like you doing the work that you've done, you were able to see how it was influenced from just what you saw, kind of growing up. Same for me. But now I can turn to, is it really fun? Well, let me collect evidence for that. Let me find the truth of that. Not that that's, explicitly, written out in the Bible, but through repenting, through changing my mind, through, exploring that, is it really fun? Well, when I go out, when I drink again, I'm going to be curious about that. I'm going to observe. I'm going to think about, like, is this fun? How long is it fun? Is it fun? What does fun mean? What does fun look like? All of these questions that we can use to find the truth. But it is lovely that we have a cheat sheet in the Bible when it comes to.
Yeah. And yeah. I want to mention the famous, the verse that when I read it, I was like, oh, it is in here, right? Is the Romans 12:2, which we know it if we grew up in like by Sunday school. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And when I came across that, I freaked out because I was like, oh my gosh, it is here. But then I went and I looked up the Message version because I just love the Message. And it says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good, because that is exactly what we have done when it comes to drinking. We've become adjusted to our culture because of all the subconscious conditioning. And the Bible says, hey, that's not what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to take every thought captive, and you're supposed to run it through the lens of what Jesus says, not what all this conditioning says.
Yeah. And what culture says. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is just, I don't know, so cool.
It's so powerful. I know I didn't make that connection myself until after I'd found freedom from alcohol.
Same.
And it was one of those where it was like, yes, like this is the explanation that this explains what I did, even though I didn't know that that's, necessarily exactly what I was doing, but that explains it right there. And that's where such a great example of like the truth being right there in the Bible. So no, it doesn't say like alcohol is not fun, but thinking about it from this lens, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. There's the truth of that. And using that as, to aid us in that, it's huge. Similarly, like how did, like when we talk about, I know meditation is something that I want,
Yeah.
get into, because I was thinking about too, like how when we think about mindfulness and how it's like, oh, like, you know, is this anti-Christian? Is science anti-Christian? Like, am I even allowed to do, you know, mind work and look at the science and all of this kind of stuff? And then similarly with meditation. But of course, you know, and the point is that we made earlier that it's of course we can, because it's all gifted to us from the Lord. It's not separate from, you know, and so thinking about meditation and how that was something that, again, it's like, wait, if that's a way for me to access kind of my thinking and find that space. So, you know, if someone's like, well, how do I, you know, take my thoughts captive? Well, you know, starting with finding that space between yourself and your mind, seeing yourself as separate from your mind, you know, being the observer of your thoughts, as Eckhart Tolle would say. Like, that's kind of the very first place to start. And some people would call that through meditation. But, you know, we have different meanings for what those things mean. But that was something that was huge on my journey, is kind of venturing into this meditation world, if you will. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I was always, again, like we kind of started off by saying, like, weary of this whole thought until I realized that it worked. But then when I found out that was also like exactly what we're being called to do as Christians, is to run everything through truth and not, and it's also, sorry, going off on a little bit of a tangent here. Like, this is also how we break shame, which I know we'll get into at a later time, but this is how we break shame, right? Because we don't have to be stuck in the thoughts of the past, and we don't have to be stuck in the fact that it's our fault and we're somehow damaged because we can't control alcohol, you know? And so it's so powerful for that as well. And again, like, I just sometimes think, how do people do this whole mindfulness thing without the Bible? Because we get to battle all of the thoughts with actual truth that we get to hold in our hands, you know? So I don't know if that answered the question, but I just think it's so cool that this work runs parallel with what we're taught as Christians.
Yeah. What we know to be true. And it's interesting. Yeah. Touching on shame. And that's for sure something that we could spend 17,000 episodes on, because I think it's so huge. And I always love to say that I was that person that's like, I didn't have shame, which, by the way, and I think I've said this on other episodes, like, I didn't have shame, but the people that say that they don't have shame are probably the people that are controlled by it the most, because they're so disconnected from that realization that even exists. And you think about shame being kind of, you know, shame is that weapon of the enemy, you know, using, you know, different eyes for which to view things. If you think about shame as the perception of, how we're being perceived by somebody else, it's looking through somebody else's eyes and making that our truth, versus looking through the eyes of the only one who matters, looking through the eyes of the Lord, which comes through the truth in the Word. Like, who does He say I am? Who does, you know, what is His perception of me? And I think getting into kind of like what one of our, you know, applications of like how to do this work, one of the exercises of through meditation, it's in that turning to, okay, like looking through the eyes of the Lord versus the eyes of anybody else out there. And through doing that, it changes our thinking, and finding that space means, for me, like, it started for me of, you know, like stillness, solitude, silence, like quiet time. Like, I did not have any breaks from music or phone calls or people, or there was always, you know, something going on. And I didn't realize that as long as I was living in that kind of like distracted space, that I didn't have the opportunity to even, you know, figure out what my thinking was, what my thoughts were. So it started very simply for me in kind of, okay, like, what does it look like to meditate? Well, to me, it means sitting and being silent and still and alone. Psalm 46:10 was my like first meditative kind of experience and doing that like in a diminishing prayer kind of way. And that, has continued as a great anchor for what it means to find that space between my thinking and being caught up in it and presence.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. And I think we're going to get into more of kind of like how we can be aware of our thinking and how we can change our thinking and how this like really gets down to the nitty gritty of like changing our drinking. And I think we still have neuroplasticity to talk about. And so we'll do that, I think, probably in our next one, right? Because there's just so much more. But I think if we can leave anybody that's listening to this with just like the encouragement that you're not your thoughts, and just to start getting really curious and aware of what you're thinking and where that might have come from. And, for me, I think I'm not like a huge journaler, but I do like to write. And so for me, I think a lot of this came out in writing in response to different like Bible studies. And there's a really good one called Keys to Freedom, or I know I'm always like banging on about the new, like the Jenny Allen, Get Out of Your Head, but there are like some really good studies. And so I think in response to seeing the like biblical truth line up with this stuff and then writing responses out was really helpful to me too. So we can kind of, get into all that stuff.
Yes.
In our next one next week.
So good. Yes, girl. Love it.
Yay. So good.
So good. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Thanks for joining us, y'all. And we do have a community. I'm going to say that. We have a community that's kicking off. So if you head over to our website, you'll be able to find kind of where you can get connected with us and where you can meet other listeners and all of that good stuff at www.jesusdrankwine.com. You can also watch all the episodes there. So, yeah.
Let's keep the convo going.
Let's keep the convo going. Stay curious.
Yes.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com, and make sure you follow us over on the gram at butjesusdrankwine.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites at meadhollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle to find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you. We'll see you next week.
Bye.